And we're live on Book Chat Live. And this week we have the amazing, it's Andre Gress Flitcher, I think is, or is Flitcher just
Yeah,
your pen?
yes, with the initials, yeah, Andre Gressbusher.
So you are a multi-award winning author of, is it fantasy? I mean, it's from looking at,
Mostly,
yeah.
yeah, mostly fantasy, and I wrote my first standalone horror novel, Black Rose
Ooh,
Cocoon.
yeah.
Yeah, but I get bored easily when it comes to writing, so
Yeah.
when I finish the next trilogy or series that I'm going to be working on, and actually I already started. Um, I'll be going back to standalone novels. They'll have a very strong influence from Stephen King, and they'll have some tie-ins to the universe I started to create with my series Boone and Jacque. But they'll be you can read them as standalone novels. So because that's how Stephen King did his whole universes.
Yeah.
Everything is kind of or strongly connected, but you can still read them as like character pieces that stand alone. So that's
Okay.
what really inspired my style.
Right. Shall we get started? We've got two Stephen King books to start. It by Stephen King. So
Yeah.
this has been chosen before, obviously, but why did you pick this book?
Well, first off, I got let me point to it, the first edition back there,
Yeah.
and I it was a mistake. I should have paid attention, but on thriftbooks.com, I got the first edition, but without the dust cover.
Um,
So I have two copies and one that no one wants for some reason. But the reason why I chose that book is uh, I had never read any lengthy book before this novel.
yeah.
So when I was in university for creative writing, I had one of my like graduation courses to do, and part of it was reading a book and then doing a presentation on it. And I, because I wasn't working at the time, I decided, well, I'm going to try a big book. So I tried It by Stephen King, read that in about a month and a half, and that's while doing four courses. So I was reading like 60, 100 pages a day, and I thought that was going to be very hard. But the
Yeah.
way Stephen King approaches narrative is it's almost like he's taking the story, especially the world building, inch by inch. So when he focuses literally on a small town, Derry, you feel like it has a bigger personality than what it is physically. So what I find truly fascinating about that skill is that you can take something small um, from a literal standpoint and try to really not embellish but maximize its value in terms of its heartbeat. That
Yeah.
it's not just some uh, environment and atmosphere that the characters are attached to or even oblivious to, and he mirrors both of those connections in terms of character, where there are characters that have a strong connection to the world and the even Pennywise, um, and then there's the adults that don't really have a connection on a supernatural level, but they do have a connection on a political level
Yeah.
and all this stuff. So that's why I chose that.
Okay. And we got another Stephen King book, but I mean, there are a lot of books by Stephen King. I mean, I
Yeah.
read like, I can't remember I can never remember what it is because it's in US date format, but the one with the Kennedy assassination. So
Mhm.
why did you pick? I mean, you've actually picked three books here by Stephen King, but
Yeah.
why these specific books and why was it on the selection list and not say another book that Stephen King would?
Okay. Um, I mean, I haven't read all of his books. I've read other ones. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna pigeonhole myself like that. Um, but the reason why I chose that book of his entire collection is that when I was first trying to expand my diversity of books,
Yeah.
um, it was the first book that I saw myself rereading.
Oh, okay.
especially because it's such a lengthy book.
Yeah.
No one really rereads a big book unless they absolutely love it. There's a real skill between writing a medium-sized book like 300-400 pages and writing something over 1,000 pages and it being popular. To make that book popular is not easy. So the fact that he can keep a reader's attention for a very lengthy period of time and want to know every single um little connection from other books that go into the entity of Pennywise, that is just that's just insane to me. So that's what grabbed my attention.
Okay. Well, shall we go on to the next book, which is also by Stephen King? So, Talisman by Stephen King.
Oh,
Now, I must admit, I'd never heard of this until we picked it. So, why
so
Talisman?
again, behind my head,
Yeah.
but I also have a slightly newer version right here.
Mm,
Okay, so he co-wrote this with Peter Straub,
yeah.
who unfortunately passed away. I think I don't well, not that long ago. Anyway, so this is I think almost 700 pages. Oh, for 700. Okay, 765. So I chose this. Well, I mean, the way I first heard about this was through Stranger Things, where the creators of the show have been signed on to do I think either a series or a direct adaptation of this novel. So I went to a used bookstore and just kind of thumbed through it, and I was like, "This is interesting. It's like almost like an acid dream, um, in a very sort of a New York kind of environment." And I was very interested by that because he tried to keep both the city energy and a very countryside energy for this child, who is the main character, that's trying to save his sick mother, and that's basically the plot. Um, and he goes to a place called the Territories, which is a parallel universe to where he lives. And I thought that was interesting, and the way he increased not just the level of danger for this one character, but the fact that he didn't make the character stupid like most young boys are when it
Yeah.
comes to being without guidance. Um, so he made him smart enough and resourceful enough that when he's put in peril or even surrounded by people he doesn't know, I thought that was really well done. So yeah.
Okay. And have you, in your own writing, have you taken any lessons from your evident interest in Stephen King? Uh, I mean,
Yeah,
are you a pantser in the same way that he is, and just like you don't plan out the novels, you just let them go, or
for Boone
something?
and Jacque, yes.
Yeah,
Not so much for Black Rose Cocoon,
yeah,
um, because that was a concept that not only was it new to me, but to most people,
yeah,
because there have been books in the past, very rare to find, where they do multiple character rotation from chapter to chapter, but you don't
uh,
really see it that often because it's
yeah,
so challenging structure. But I was like, you know what, I can do it. I'll do it right now. So I did a four character rotation with the serial killer as the fifth character. That yes, they are the like the central focus of the story, but I don't make them the center of attention. It's
yeah,
more like the character is pulling them through the through line of the story. Um, and that's what Stephen King does with most of his monsters or antagonists,
yeah,
where they're connected to everything, but they're not like doing jump scares the whole time. And because that's very easy to do with any dark character where they're like grabbing somebody or doing something very violent or whatever. It's like, okay, but see, that's a physical action or a psychological action, and it's such a in the moment type of choice to do as a writer that you can't rely just on that. You have to rely really on the character's reaction in the time of quiet. Time of quiet, like under tension. That is where we really get to see how do characters react to any level of danger and stress,
Yeah.
and where how do they evolve throughout the story. So that's what I learned from him, especially with his, like, I guess you could call it tedious writing,
Yeah.
um, where tedious writing can be very exhausting. So that's why, as popular as he is, not everyone likes that kind of style, where someone's like saying, "Here, let me take your hand." Saying, "No, no, no, I let go. I see you're holding my hand too long." So, so that's why I drew inspiration from him. Not in the sense that I want to write like him. I have a more poetic way of writing in terms of not just language and style, but also how I present action and how I enrich characters as they evolve, not just with the world, but also the connection they have with that world.
Okay. Well, talking about more poetic, let's go on to the next book. Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. So this is
Mm.
not Stephen King,
Oh,
clearly.
but yeah, I have it right here.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really old copy.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so the only really, it's just gonna sound kind of lazy, but the only reason why I picked this book up is I heard it about how popular it was and such a staple for not just like the film industry and what's considered a classic novel, and even used for English classes in high school and all that stuff. But also, I was just interested in how do you make a short story and in its simplicity, I mean, how do you make that memorable and stand for the test of time? So I read it and I was like, it is not. There are obviously some strong themes in here, and it is classic for a reason, but
Mhm.
it's themes that um that can be enriched and evolved um from a newer era of writers, where whoever's influenced by Ernest Hemingway understands that he's from a time where there wasn't such a need to be clever or like overly clever. So I like the idea of seeing how can you maximize power in theme through simplicity, and how can you um, maintain it throughout the story. So that's what fascinated me by this book. That's why I chose it. And also the language is, it's not trying to it's not trying to confuse you or outwit you as you're
Yeah.
reading it. Like the first line is, he was an old man who fished alone in a skiff in the Gulf Stream, and he had gone 84 days now without taking a fish. There's
Mhm.
there's not much poetry in there, but he's also not dumbing it down. It's more like, here's the environment, here's the overall energy, and here's the age, and overall, how can I put it? Closeness to his expiration as a human being, and
Yeah.
that he's literally in the elements. And I think he has a young helper. I remember that character. So I thought that was a a good idea, an interesting idea. So yeah,
Yeah. So it sounds like poetry that's understandable, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
hmm,
Because poetry can get very literary, can't it? I
hmm,
mean, literature can get very poetic, but as a kind of a social selection thing
yeah.
rather than actually making it entertaining. Okay, let's go on to the next book. Ooh, let me get rid of that one beforehand. Yeah. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. So, why this book?
I don't have a copy with me, but I remember very well because I read it a couple times.
Yeah.
So the Road by Cormac McCarthy. Hmm, that's what's so interesting about his style, I got a few more of his books that I'm going to start reading. He has this this interesting way of finding the beauty in darkness.
Yeah.
So, because the road is a very I wouldn't say, yeah, it's a very dark apocalyptic novel, but he doesn't like he doesn't cling on to the drama of the story in the sense of I'm gonna make you cry. It's more like you if you do, you do.
Mm.
And he takes the the nature of the story with a paintbrush, where it's like he's asking you to feel every grain of soil and tree, and even the sound of the shopping cart as they're going along this vacant road, and even the weight of the world's ashes on the clothes. So that kind of thing where he's trying to show the weight in something that could feel light.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really interesting um way of saying it's just two people trying to survive the vacancy of resources, and that whenever they find any resources, everyone's out for themselves. But he's not trying to, like, the father is not trying to get too reckless with it, where his focus is protect my child, make sure he has food, and make sure I have just enough to be able to do that. um but my son is what's most important to me right now. So uh, he obviously focused on the father son relationship, but he didn't want it to be like you should pity them. It's more like these are just two people that are trying to survive while everyone else is um, crying and screaming, because they're not only are they in bigger groups, but it's also the danger of um, people trying to survive not just a difficult time, but the competition of survival.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You never been tempted to write post-apocalyptic fiction, or?
Well, I'm going to, but not right now.
Well, you're on an interview at the moment, so I don't want you to be writing right at the moment.
No, I have like 10 books planned. So um like one like the final book of my upcoming series I'll be working on, called Pendulum of Crazul.
Yeah.
Um so in the final book I'm going to be showing that kind of post apocalyptic world in a more supernatural sense. Um there is another novel that I'm probably not going to do for years because it was a very small idea.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, I'll probably do that someday.
Okay. Well, let's go on to something that I can see is on the back on your back shelf already, on the
Mm,
right. So, uh, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince by
yeah.
J.K. Rowling.
Hmm.
So I can see Harry oh, was it? So, oh, I'm
No,
forgetting who
that
the actor is. He's with one behind you. It's the one played by Gary Oldman, but I can't remember what his name is.
that's serious.
Serious. Yeah.
Serious Black. So here it is.
Yeah.
I think that's a first edition.
Mm.
Um, so the reason why I chose this book in particular from the series is that it was the first novel where Harry isn't so much the center of attention anymore, and also because a lot of politics are involved in this book. Um, the first and I think the second chapter don't even have him in there.
Yeah.
I think he's mentioned once or twice, but they're focusing on um, the bleeding of the wizard world into the Muggle world, and not just in danger, but in politics too, because now two political leaders are talking to each other due to the interference and level of danger bleeding into the real world. So I like that idea of um the truth of Harry not being the center of attention, and also the the darkness that has um grown throughout the series has had like it shrank his level of importance to the resolution of this dark versus light magic war. So uh also I like that it's like the exception of YA. It's
Yeah,
not really it's not really YA. There's too many dark themes for it to be something like that. Like look, it says the other minister.
yeah,
That's the first chapter. So the fact that there's no even reference to Harry in the first book, it's like, hey, this isn't about you anymore. There's a lot more to it than that. You're not that special. You're just a key a key piece of finding the solution to this problem. So that's why I chose that book.
yeah. All right, I can understand that actually, because I mean, I've only ever really seen the films, so I must admit,
Mhm,
but I think that it's very easy for these stories to end up with a kind of messiah figure who is just like the entire thing for the whole book, and
mhm,
actually having a book where he's not the main character for large chunks of it is a
yeah,
good idea for the series as a whole. I mean, obviously, you don't want him to be mentioned and then not be appear in any of the books, but
yeah.
I think
Like
having one or
yeah,
two books,
the other thing that was really missing from the movie, um, there's a lot of discussion between Harry and Dumbledore because like the whole purpose of this novel is to uncover the truth behind "He Who Shall Not Be Named."
yeah,
That has been his what has kept him alive, but also made him less human, and that's the Horcruxes.
yeah,
So now we're playing with morals of how willing are we to destroy ourselves to get what we want, and
mm,
that's where his morality comes in for Voldemort. Oh, I said his name. Oh no. um, um, I wish that they had more discussions between Harry and Dumbledore in the movies because first off, it's the last time we see Dumbledore when he's alive.
yeah,
Two, um, we get to see a lot more history of Tom Riddle
yeah,
when he was younger, and we get to find out that the reason why he is such a dark character is because he was born from a love potion.
mm,
So now we are also seeing not just emotional play, but lack of emotion, and that he's basically a mistake.
yeah,
But because he never felt love before, because he's not born from love, it's also asking the audience, what is your perspective of love and sex?
yeah,
You know, like when someone makes a baby, is it simply by accident, or was it with purpose? So
yeah. Okay. So it sounds like the book actually. I have heard before that people say that this is the book that was most badly converted into a film, so to speak.
yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, shall we move on?
Hmm.
Penultimate Peril from the series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket.
I got the hard copy right here.
So, why this particular book? Is this the? Is this is where
Like
is
a
this the
last,
series?
second last.
Second last. Okay.
Yeah, because they're in the hotel with basically all of the characters and some other characters they don't know about.
Yeah.
Meaning the triplets, or not the triplets, the three Baudelaires. Um, the reason why I chose this book is because we see the antagonist, Count Olaf, descend into madness
Yeah.
because he's been after their fortune for such a long time that it's no longer about the money; it's just the obsession. So we see his obsessive nature break him, and he even he doesn't want, how can I put it? He doesn't want anything else.
Yeah.
Before it was just the money, and then he got a girlfriend, and then he said, "Screw you, I want to do this by myself." Because she was obsessed with the sugar bowl because of what it actually entails. Um, and then we see the judgment towards these Baudelaires, where now there's a mortal dilemma of what did they do to get to this point. So, because at this point they've stolen, they've lied. Basically, they took a page out of Count Olaf's persona and what he was willing to do to get what he wants. And then we see what they're willing to do to survive and get away from what they consider to be bad choice, but they make bad choices because um, they just they're so strapped for resources and a safe place to be that uh, they're just stuck in one place. That's why Penultimate Peril is takes place at a hotel that's called the Last Safe Place.
Yeah.
So I like that idea of, yes, this is um a writer that shows a juvenile style of writing, but the story itself is not juvenile,
Yeah.
uh, especially towards the end, where they find out the truth of their parents and the truth of the world that was taken away from them or kept from them, and we see their true they're not just their true colors, but also their true potential to become like their parents. So I thought that was interesting, especially the trial scene where everyone that's an adult is trying to um, do whatever they have to do for themselves in order to survive, but also still not really believing um, the children. And then Count Olaf capitalizes on that disbelief and creates this sort of like shifting focus onto the bad choices, like in air quotes, that they made, and he makes the audience or the people in the trial focus on that instead of what they actually went through
Yeah.
in the negative sense. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's is another thing we might be coming back to this series. So let's go on to the next book, which is Boone and Jacque, Cytrus
Mhm.
Moonlight by a certain A G Flitcher, which is you. So where is this? Where is this in the order of your
Yeah, right here. It
books?
is the second last book.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the first novel of the series that wasn't too focused on the supernatural. So I was like, you know what? I want to write a mystery novel and see how if it can still fit the theme of fantasy.
Yeah.
So the reason why I chose this book is because it's when Boone and Jacque are adults for the first time in the timeline. Um, and the reason why I prefer this book in my series is that I get to see how they were able to grow up without parents and become parents themselves.
Yeah.
So um the evolution of how they got there was really strong to me, and we get to see the kind of choices they make as adults versus as children, and were how exhausted they are of this adventure, because Boone and Shammy, his wife, um they didn't want the adventure anymore. They just want to live a peaceful life and be happy. Where Jacques and his wife Xantia, um, they want the same thing, but they also know that danger has always followed them, and that as detectives for special cases, um, they they still find that world interesting. So even though they inadvertently involved Boone and Shammy, it wasn't because they want to put them in danger. It's more like danger will follow them if they don't resolve
Mm,
this. So I wanted this level of danger to feel more real and less reliant on magic and creatures and all this stuff that I did for the first three books. Um, and also there's some things that happen towards the end that separates everybody, and they question, um, where is my future, or what is my future? Not who am I? I know who I am, but I don't know where my future is going to be. So that's why I chose that one.
yeah. Okay. And did you prefer writing mystery over fantasy, or you
Um, I think because that's where I was a pantser for
yeah,
writing, I wasn't really focusing on that. Um, but what I can say is that, sorry, now you can see my face. Um, uh, I knew that because I was trying different themes within each book and even a different subgenre of fantasy. Uh, I knew that I was on my way to doing pretty much everything,
yeah,
because without really understanding, not just diversity of genre, but also what is actually necessary for a story, you don't really have to stick to one genre. You have to stick to at least like a general feeling
yeah.
that can help you categorize your books when you put them for sale. Uh, but to say I'm going to write a romance novel, it's like, okay, what else?
Mm,
What other layers are you adding to this? So I'm going to write mystery again, but the way I see storytelling is, I'm not saying I'm writing a mystery. I'm saying I write a story.
yeah.
So
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I have goals of like I'm gonna write this kind of book, but it's more like, but what is the story? What exactly am I going to uh, choose in terms of genres and overall storyline that will make this a unique concept?
Yeah.
So, for example, in the future, I'll be writing a book called Silver in the Closet, which is a romance novel. And I had this image in my head of a beautiful French woman in the Gulf of Mexico just smiling.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so I'll say that's a picture of a woman that a man has held on for 2 years across the world, and he wants to meet her for the first time after being in a long distance relationship after 2 years. But what happens when he meets her? Does she
Mm,
still, and are they in a safe place, or is there a reason why she doesn't want to see him? Why she never met him?
yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. All right. Before we get too sidetracked with that, let's go on to the next book. Lord of the Flies by William Golding. So it's obviously been recommended quite a few times before. Oh, oh yeah. Is that first edition or it's just a
I
very
think
old copy?
so. When was it published? Um, this is a 1954, so I think it is first edition.
Yeah. It looks
Okay,
like
so um honestly I chose this because I remember reading portions of it in high school for English assignments,
yeah.
and I saw the movie, the first one. Uh so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna buy this. And I know it's a first edition because my thumbs turned green when I was holding the book. The ink is so faded. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, what is this stuff? Anyway, um so like J.K. Rowling, uh William Golding has a natural ability to make the environment feel not just natural, but have the characters move in a way that it's seamless when he shifts from a point of view. So, for example, when Piggy gets swallowed by the ocean towards the end, I was like, "Wait, where did he go?" I didn't realize that he was just gone. He was just taken
Yeah.
away. Um, the other thing that fascinated me is being thrown into a story that has already started. That's not easy to do because you're like, but I don't know these people. How am I
Yeah.
supposed to, stick with it? But I think if you just like you forget about there being an actual like fresh beginning, then you just soak in that that part of the character's story in that part of their lives. You know, these are children, and they're old enough that we don't really know the beginnings of their childhood, but they're also young enough um, for this to be just a portion of their life, and whatever happens after is not really of interest because this is the most like not just lively part of their lives, but also the most brutal
Yeah.
because now we get to see how do still developing brains survive elements that are completely alien to them. And also, we don't really know much about why they were abandoned on this island. We get a little bit of why the adults were separated from the children. Um, but when adults come back into this story, meaning at the end of the story, um, the children freeze and then one of them breaks down. So we see that yes, throughout the story, they're reckless, they're crazy, um, they're trying to survive while trying to eat each other, basically. Uh, but as soon as adults come into play, they become children again,
Mm.
where the safety of an adult being around makes them feel small again, makes them feel like they can depend on someone who's not just more mature, but also has more resources and safety to offer. So I like that play of yes, by themselves they're trying to survive and against each other, but as soon as adults are in the room, they don't want to survive. They want to feel happy and safe and horse around without blood.
Yeah. Okay. So, should we go into the next book, which is by a familiar Boone and Jacque, Saddleton Haunting
Yes,
by you.
yes, by me. I'm so wonderful.
Well, I mean, if you can't push your own book into an interview, then it's like,
Okay, so funny story about this book.
yeah.
There's a missing chapter title in here, but I
Oh,
didn't want to. I can fix it.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm moving on to other things now. Um, so Boone and Jack Saddleton Haunting is a favorite of mine because it was sort of me really pushing my visual boundaries, where I had things that are very bizarre, which is what most of my readers said about this book. Like, for
Yeah.
example, at a certain point of the story, boys and girls are separated into orphanages that are just boys and then girls, but they're neighbors, so they can
Yeah.
kind of see each other. And that means that Boone, Jacque, and Shammy are separated. Um, and not like Boone and Jacque together. Jacque is separated by himself because someone heard about his detective skills, even as a teenager. And he was separated from the group at a certain point. Um, so all three characters are somewhat together, but not really. Um, the thing that I tried to do, like my hardest here for the first time, was how can I do fantasy at a high level? Because I've never really had a hand at this point at doing high fantasy,
Mm.
and this was probably the first time where I was like, let's see how crazy I can go. So, for example, in the boys' orphanage, um, anytime a child is caught um, getting up in the middle of the night to sneak out or something, I created what's called mischief seekers.
Yeah.
So that means whenever they step on the stairs, it lights up, and it becomes so bright that the adults wake up and grab the child and put him back to bed. I even have like really weird things. I have flying rats and six-legged bunnies. So it's it's pretty weird.
Yeah.
I also have full reach, which is it's like 12-foot high jaguar. Um, and I don't know. It was me trying to be crazy, and it worked. So
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that's why it's my favorite. It's also um where I felt that my narrative voice was getting stronger.
Yeah.
So because I was worried about not for this series, but I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna make a series that feels memorable until I've actually practiced it. So
Yeah.
Boone and Jacque has been my trial and error series for Pendulum of Crozul.
Yeah. So where's that book in the series in order in the series then? Is that
Third
second
book.
book? Third book. Okay. And
Yeah.
how many books in total? Are there five or
There's five, and then I'm gonna have two standalone novels with Boone and Jacques separately, or even together.
yeah.
Have both a connection to this world and to Pendulum of Crozul.
Okay. All right. So let's move back to another author who's appeared before. Misery by Stephen King. I don't know why I didn't move this book up with the other two, but for whatever reason, I left it down here. So,
So I chose this novel because I think yeah, it was the first Stephen King novel that I read.
yeah,
It was just the first big book that I read. Um, so the thing about Misery is he's written writer characters before, but
yeah,
what made this unique is that he physically limited the character. So we don't get to see them really being a writer. Like there's little parts in there, but it's more about the secondary character's obsession towards him, and less about his journey as a writer and fame, and more about how resourceful he is, and also how good of an actor he is towards this obsessive fan.
yeah,
So I liked the idea of obsession, and also um, the main character's actually lack of interest in milking um, uh, a popularity contest with
yeah,
other writers. So that's what's important to me is that if you're if you're gonna put a hat on a hat about writing about a writer, you may as well make it less about the job and more about the person.
yeah,
So that's something that if I ever try to do that myself, I'm gonna have to be I take my really take my time with that because I'm like, oh,
yeah,
reading them too many times. I don't know how to.
yeah. I mean, I think somebody was saying that this is in a previous show that this particular book is actually really good in that way that it demonstrates a writer who is restricted. So yeah, it sounds like that's something that appealed to you as well.
Mhm.
Okay, let's go on to the next book. The Wide Window. Back to the series of unfortunate events ago. So,
Yeah,
what?
that's upstairs. I'm not gonna run upstairs and get the book,
Oh
but
yeah, don't worry about it. Wait, just get the other
1
book.
second, please.
Get the other book in the series back up again.
Okay, so Wide Window, which I think is the second book in the
yeah,
series. Um, that was our first introduction to uh, not just members of VFD, or volunteer fire what's department? No, I think it's volunteer fire department,
yeah,
something like that. So that's the secret society of adults. Um, so when they go to see this, I don't remember her name, but this woman that was considered a very, strong female character in her uh, haytime, I
Yeah.
think is the term. Um, we see how the children's world collides with the adults that they were purposely uh, blinded by, that they are not supposed to know about their parents' lives, especially the secret one, but they get a bit of a glimpse into it. So to see how close they get to like the first bit of truth to this world that they're not familiar with is what like makes the story pick up steam, because now it's less about uh, the introduction to Count Olaf and more about the introduction to the world that they never knew about their parents, and that this person is not the same as they once were. So now we get to have a bit of distance from the main character's growth and more about why did this character backtrack? How did they change in reverse? Because when you do a character arc, you can do a negative character arc. You can
Yeah.
have them go from um, having their shit together to falling apart.
Mm.
So I like that introduction of a negative character arc that doesn't really reverse again into a positive arc. It's more like this is just what happens to some people. Some people, after whatever happened to them in their past, they become broken. So not only do we get to see that as readers, but the audience, sorry, the characters as well, and they just kind of have to move on from that person. That they may like hope that they have a safe home to live in, but at the same time, it's like, do we are we really that desperate that we want to help this woman like piece herself together and find a new place? But the the writer takes that option away and says, "Nope, you're going to carry on. You're going to keep going until the next to the next caretaker, because it's too soon. It's too soon for me to put a bow on this and just call it a day." So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I think there's a lack of stakes in a lot of storytelling nowadays where, as you say, there's not enough tragedy in a way. It's like it's nice when you have a tragedy in the story of some element.
yeah, I've had interviews where they ask me, why do I include such dark themes in my writing? I'm like, well, if I don't include dark themes, and then it's just sunshine and rainbows, what's so interesting about that? I
Mm,
mean, think about news. Why the news is still a thing, right?
yeah,
Because they know not only are they trying to inform um, people at home about what's going on in the world or where they live, but they're also saying, "Hey, the only thing entertaining for us to show you is the dark stuff." If
yeah,
I say, "Here's the largest cookie ever made," it's like, so
yeah, yeah. I mean, they kind of propaganda in and is never really ever usually positive because positives get boring after a while.
yeah, it's all about ratings, right?
Yeah.
Everyone loves drama.
Yeah. Okay, on that note, let's go on to the next book. We're going on a bit. Becoming Rain, the Berry and Water series, book 2 by K.A. Tucker.
Yeah.
So, why
So
this?
I gifted that to a writer friend of mine when I was still in university.
Yeah.
But it was the first sort of like crime drama novel that I read that in some parts I was like, do we have to have that kind of cheesy romance? But it worked. Like it's one of those things where you can look past the cheesiness of why the character has to fall in love with the person they're not supposed to,
Yeah.
um, and just focus on the complexity of decision making. So, for those who don't know, essentially it's about an undercover agent that falls in love with her target
Yeah.
uh, that lives nearby. At first, I was just like, "Oh God, what is this going to end up being?" But the way they kept distance from between the characters and how they eventually um, fell in love um, was well done, because it was less about the romance and more about choices in terms of uh, is it safe for me to actually stick with this person, and do I care about the
Yeah.
level of safety? Because that's what's so interesting about certain character choices of, do I go for the dangerous path, or do I go for the path that is that
Easy.
is easier,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So that's what fascinated me about that story. I don't really read that kind of stuff, but the reason why I chose that for favorite books is that because it's not what I don't read, the fact that I was able to read it without really scratching my head at if this is a good book or not is testament to who K. Tucker is. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it says here that it's part two of a series. Is it something you can read on your own, or do you have to read?
Well, I read it by itself without knowing that it was part of a series.
Yeah.
So, because like take the famous writer David Baldacci.
Yeah.
Um, I think I read one of his books, and it said blank novel, which meant that it's a character that's reoccurring in some of other books. So
Mm,
you don't really care
yeah.
about not really knowing the history of the character, as long as the beginning feels uh how can I say, I guess premature, meaning
Yeah.
you don't really like, you don't need to know the backstory of who this person is. It's just a character, and the story is relatively new. And it doesn't like follow anything directly. So that's what makes it palatable. But of course, everyone has their taste, so there's
Yeah.
that too. But yeah,
Yeah. So the reason you like this book is because it's in a genre and style that you normally wouldn't like, and yet you still enjoyed it. Is that kind of the
yeah,
sum?
that's how I tried to write Black Rose Cocoon,
Yeah.
because I don't read that kind of stuff. So it's like, well, let me see if I can write a crime novel that I like. So
Okay. Well, that brings us nicely on. So let me
yeah,
play the and Black Rose Cocoon, as you just mentioned. So this
yeah.
was this is your what's your, is it crime fiction?
Uh, I guess horror supernatural,
Yeah.
which I thought was a weird classification from my first editorial review
Yeah.
by Literary Titan, because they in the interview that they asked that they did with me, they asked me how did I balance the detective part with the supernatural. I'm like, well, the way balanced is by not intentionally putting supernatural elements.
Yeah.
It's more like it was just there towards the end, where there was like certain truths to the legend of this, not just this killer, but also their nesting area, which I kind of tease on the back cover here.
Ooh,
So that's the cliff
yeah.
of where, like above the ladder here is where the house is. And it's not really a spoiler because I'm not going to describe it to you.
Yeah.
um, so the reason why I chose that as my favorite novel is because first off, this book took like a year and a half to write, because for 6 months I didn't do any writing. I just did a bunch of research and listening to true crime podcasts, interviewing criminology professors, um, and I was after like when I was done that I was like, okay, why do I want to write this? What is the purpose of this novel? So the purpose was not to focus on the main on the killer, which I was going to do originally, to do
Yeah.
a character origin story. I was like, "Meh, it's that's not what interests me about serial killers. What interests me is the level of complexity of relationships around this person. Because in order to commit serial murders, there has to be a network of how you got there,
Yeah.
how you were able to pull this off without being caught, and that when you were caught, um, is it just you now, or did you create a cult of people? Like take Charles Manson, for example.
Mm,
Um, that's how it happened for him. He committed some murders, but he convinced other people to commit the murders for him. So whenever they would interview him, he's like, "I didn't kill anybody."
yeah.
It's like, "Well, I guess so, but you told people to."
I was feeling bad there because I was like, "Oh, so smiling at Charles Manson." It's like, I was smiling at your explanation. Um,
So
mm,
what was important to me, but then, like I said, I did a 4 character rotation. Um, was that it was less about the kills because when you kill someone, especially like physically, not
yeah,
not not like over time, it's a small moment, which means that the way they left this earth early was actually somewhat um merciless or
yeah,
merciful. So what's not merciful is leaving the people around this killed person is what weight of emotion they have to deal with, and especially the gruesomeness of how it happened and whatever message this murderer had. So that's what was that's what makes a dark character menacing.
yeah,
It's not the killing, it's the mind games, and also how long they go with those mind games, and when they choose to stop and start up again. So the
yeah.
unpredictability as well. So yeah.
Okay, right. So that was the actually
It
for
won its
keeping.
first award, by the way.
Sorry.
It won its first award, by the way.
Okay. Well, can you show the book? I don't know if you showed the book cover actually. When you maybe I missed it. Oh, there we go. So just in case anybody did miss it, what was the award it won?
Literary Titan Golden Book Award.
Ooh, sounds impressive. So, so I ask everybody two questions at the end of the show, or usually two questions. Um, if from this selection of books that we've talked about,
Mhm.
um, if you had to give somebody a book from this selection, what would be what kind of questions would you ask the person to determine what book they pick, or would there just be one book you would automatically give them? Um,
I would ask them, how bored are you? Like, do you want something exciting to read or do you want a slow burn?
yeah,
Um, the other question I would ask is, what do you usually read and what have you been wanting to read?
yeah,
So, because it's not just about taste, it's also about, well, what do I have that's closest to what you want,
yeah,
right? Because some people are really picky about their books, and some people are just like, just give me something. I don't have, I don't, I just need to be entertained. So I would recommend 2 books. Um, I would recommend, let's say, obviously, It by Stephen King.
yeah,
Um, and I actually, it's gonna sound kind of contradictory to promoting myself, but I wouldn't sell myself for those books, but I would sell them on, um, what's the other one? Honestly, read the whole series of Unfortunate Events,
yeah,
because what I found interesting about that series is that I read that as a 20-year-old. So to read something with a juvenile language style, but still find it interesting, shows that the author did a good job of not taking pity on the characters, and that the juvenile style was just to reach a younger audience, not to water down the complexities of life because they're younger.
yeah,
Because if you write a YA or younger, like middle grade series, some authors think that they have to dumb it down for the reader because they don't know. They focus on the reading level. It's like, well,
yeah,
it's not a reading level. It's also about you asking that target demographic, how mature are you? How much are you willing to learn and understand through a medium of entertainment, but that's also somewhat educational.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well, the other question you've kind of already slightly answered during the interview, but that is, what are your plans for writing books going forward? And I mean, you've
okay,
kind of talked about that a little bit, but you might as well
yeah,
just
a little bit.
reiterate.
Firstly, I'll be working on a trilogy called Pendulum of Krazul.
Yeah.
Krazul is spelled Khrazul, but pronounced Krazul.
Yeah.
Um, so I chose to do only a trilogy because I was like, I'm ready to do other novels. I don't
Mm,
want to take too long doing this trilogy, but I'm gonna make it meaty. So I've this is the first series, like fantasy wise, where I'm actually like building a structure from scratch instead of just being a pantser.
yeah.
Because in order for a trilogy to be memorable, like Lord of the Rings, um, you have to take your time being detailed and also making the world not s- making the world as big as you can
Mm,
without bloating it too much. So that's what's up next, and then I'm going to be writing a book that I thought was very Stephen King without the intention of doing that, uh, called Dead Mirrors Follow, which takes place in the same place as Black Rose Cocoon, which is called Halberton, but takes place 30 years later and is about a woman that has certain abilities and is taken to a place um, to have her, not just her abilities weaponized, but her emotions as well. And as she's going along her journey, she hears a legend about a mirror at the bottom of a river that can take you to the underworld.
yeah.
So something like that. But yeah, I have lots of books planned, and if I just sat here and told you about them, we'd be here for another hour. So I'll leave it. I'll leave it at that.
How many books do you write a year then? You must.
I think
Do you get
two, two a
two?
year,
Okay.
which is not easy when you have a full time job. But
Yeah.
I write 4 to 5,000 words a week when I'm writing. So and then if I know that I can drive it home in the last month of writing, I can bump it up to maximum 9,000 words a week. So
Yeah. Okay.
stories already in my head. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's because I was just wondering if because you've actually written quite a lot of books, so
yeah, I
uh,
wrote 8 books in how long has it been now? Yeah, basically
4 years.
7, 8 years. 'Cause I
Okay.
was first published in 2016.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been great to have you on the show. And this is where I fumble around pressing all the buttons incorrectly to try and stop entering. But thanks to the people watching on Amazon, and thanks in the future to people who watch on YouTube or listen on the podcast, or where else is it available? Anybody who watched on LinkedIn. So thanks to everybody who's watched it anywhere and will watch it anywhere. So, and thank you so much for being the guest today, Andre.